The cymbal stuff is actually a very, very small part of the sound of the song. So sometimes there's not even a hi-hat in the entire song. There's not even a cymbal crash, but you're substituting the subdivisions with something else, whether it be, a shaker or something absolutely out in left field. There's been days where I've gotten bored here and I've said, well, you know what, instead of using someone else's sample library, let me just go and make my own.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Other World Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and use Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac. The speed to create, the capacity to dream. Find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free introduction to mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you are in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lij Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Michael Estok, a producer, engineer, multi-instrumentalist, and songwriter in Youngstown, Ohio. Starting with school at the Recording Workshop and then Full Sail University, in 2004, Michael moved to Nashville, Tennessee for interning at Sony ATV Tree Studios, working under the watch of music industry legend Pat Mcmakin. During the 14 years he spent in Nashville, Michael worked as an independent producer out of his home studio and eventually returned to Sony ATV when his client, Nashville-based pop artist Kynlie, was signed. Estok continued to work with Sony, producing for Sony Artist Development Team under the watch of Troy Tomlinson, Ed Williams, and Abbey Adams. He also co-wrote and produced countless songs for artists such as Wesley Orbison, Lionel Cartwright, Tiffany Johnson, and Jon Raven. In 2017, Michael and his family decided to move from Nashville up to Canfield in Northeast Ohio, where he built Court Street Recording inside the National Historic Charles Ruggles House, which I guess was built in 1846. Pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Court Street works with local musicians, including the Vindies and Anthony LaMarca from the War on Drugs in the building, all while continuing to work long distance with pop artist Aaron B. Thompson from Vancouver Island and various Nashville artists as well, producers and songwriters. Michael is excited to bring his experience back to Ohio, where he hopes to elevate the local music scene and help local independent artists make great recordings. Awesome, dude. I love that. Please welcome Michael Estok to Recording Studio Rockstars. Michael, you ready to rock, my man?
I am ready to rock, Lij. Dude,
glad to have you here. Just a little backstory, too. A mutual friend is Jim Stewart, who's also been on the podcast, and then Ryan Humbert, an artist that I've worked with up there in Ohio. Have you worked with Ryan yourself?
No, haven't worked with Ryan, but just met him actually through Jim. And then, Ryan actually works for a really good local radio station up here, Akron Summit. And so from some other artists that I've come into contact with here, I've had the chance to meet Ryan and spend some time with him. So
cool. Well, Ryan and I did a record together called Old Souls, New Shoes years ago, about a decade ago, actually. It was just re-released this past year.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. Well, dig it, man. Yeah. Well, so give us a little more background on yourself. Tell us about where you are in your studio up there now.
Yeah, I mean, we're all settled in up here. It took us a a little while to get up and running, just for the mere fact of people don't get what it is to have a studio in your house
right
up here. So we had to go through zoning and all that fun stuff. Actually ended up being fairly supportive of it once we kind of explained everything to them a little bit better. So it took us about a year or so to kind of get everything the way we wanted it and get everything put where we want it, and then go through the zoning. And so now we had a nice big open house here a couple months back and had about 80 people here show up for it. So it was it was great, so it's just taking a little bit of work here and there, still doing a lot of stuff, like I said, via long distance, which is, thank God for technology, So,
what is your studio like? How would you describe it up there?
It's quite unique. I people see it and they say, "Wow, that looks amazing." I said, "Well, it's my first response is it's not a proper studio per se. Just in the main fact that it was built within a pool house of the dwelling that we lived in, which we actually picked out from Nashville. We found this house, and house was built in 1846. So,
wow.
So you see this, and you see what was an indoor swimming pool, and I looked at the MLS pictures, and I thought to myself, that's not an indoor pool. That's a perfect live room. So
perfect reverb chamber.
Exactly, yeah. And I've actually got, believe it or not, I've got Jim ragging me to put an echo chamber underneath where the pool was. So we floored over the pool. The control room is just off that. So it's size wise, it's close to about I would say 1,100 square feet worth of space. And then above it, there's a loft, so it's just a unique place.
Did you do the sort of like one big room design where control room and music happens in the same space, or do you do isolation? What was your approach to that?
At first it was kind of more open air like that, because the room where I'm doing the control room was actually elevated a little higher than the live room, but there really wasn't anything separating them outside of a sliding barn door, So I would say maybe 3 months ago, I had a couple bands in here, and it just, it's real hard to work that way for me. So I had to go and buy a glass door. I put that in, and then I put a window in too. So now it's a little bit more, sane for me to be able to carry on and hear what's actually coming out of the speakers versus using headphones. So
yeah, well, I've done that. So if you don't have proper isolation, then you're sitting there trying to judge whether or not you're getting a good kick drum sound, except you're hearing the actual kick drum come blasting through at the same time.
That's exactly it. Yeah. I had all my, I leave all my stuff pretty much set up most of the time, so I can just blow and go for the most part. And the way I had my drums set up through the board here, I had all my EQs, moved the way I generally would like to have them kept. And it all changed when when the door went in and the window went up. I went back and I had to revisit every channel that I had pre-EQ'd, I mean, some of the changes were shockingly drastic, just the difference between having listened on headphones versus having listened on familiar speakers that I was used to,
Yeah. So
properly.
in other words, you found that you were way overcompensating when you couldn't hear what you were doing.
It's exactly what it was. Yep.
What are some things that you think, that you were like, yeah, this seems like this makes sense that I would have done this because I couldn't hear it? Were there some specific EQs that you were boosting or cutting too much, or were you doing something screwy with compression?
Honestly, no, it wasn't compression based. It was mainly EQ. I honestly feel like I was taking too much of things out, believe it or not, which would be, the opposite of what I think you would normally expect. But yeah, no, I especially in that lower mid-range stuff. And then, it's some things I noticed, sealing it up. I was able to add a little bit more air band on some things, so. And
when you were working that way, were you listening through the speakers while you're getting sounds, or were you listening through just headphones?
It was a little bit of both, because like you said, you get that, you get you say, okay, drummer, go ahead and play just a straight groove, hi-hat, kick, snare, crash cymbal now and then. But you would get so much wash from it, flooding through. So, it was tricky to even attempt to use the speakers,
Yeah. Well, recently we were talking about something similar on the show where we were talking about the difference in how people do EQ for live production and for sound reinforcement versus in the studio. And hearing you talk about it, it makes me think that would be maybe a natural direction. Like for live stuff, it's more common to be extreme with the EQs.
Yes.
And that's probably what you naturally did because you were reinforcing what was also acoustically in the space,
Yep, that would make sense.
So that's good. That's good insight because, I have isolation now, but I certainly spent many, many years not having ideal isolation and trying to figure out how to get a great recording. And I would suggest that most of our listeners with home studios, rock stars are, don't necessarily have real isolation and are kind of grappling with some version of that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Every time I see people that can do it all within one room, I just, I have a profound respect. I know like Sylvia Massey has a setup similar where it's just her board's at one end of the hall, and then the band's right there. It just, it's a whole other way. But then again, I guess it's people who are solely accustomed to probably referencing on headphones most of the time too, so.
Yeah, maybe so. Or you just get used to what settings are going to work and you just, don't touch those EQs for a while.
there you go.
Cool, man. Well, so let's see. Tell us, so you've got your isolation. When you went in to go put in a window and a door, just to geek out on that for a sec, what were some of the challenges with that? And did you have any learning lessons about, going to Home Depot or wherever you went to go try and find a sliding glass door that works?
I would say the biggest thing is, us musicians that try to do things ourselves, protect your hands.
Right.
It was a 8-foot tall glass door, that swung. It's a swinging, 8-foot tall glass door. And, tried to lift it in there and it ended up going and it took my one finger back with it, which is my left guitar fretting hand, ring finger, and pretty much hyper extended it. So, and then of course I go and I rush and I try to make sure I can get my wedding ring off in time because I knew it was going to swell and it did. So
man.
Luckily, but it was a very terrifying moment. So, the lesson in that is ask for help when moving heavy objects. That I would say that was probably the biggest challenge. Luckily it was a miraculous recovery. I would say I was only down for about a week or so, but when it happened though, I thought to myself, well, there goes my guitar playing for at least 4 or 5 months, Wow,
so, that's a bummer, man. Sorry to hear that. I'm thinking about all the things we do in the studio, whether it's construction stuff or whether it's, just like trying to lift that huge amp that's too heavy and move it around. A lot of times you got to get some help. I just recently moved a 70-inch TV and I actually did do it all by myself. And I was lucky. I strapped it to the roof of my car at Walmart and I drove home in like a windstorm.
Goodness.
With some twine on it and was lucky to make it back.
Wow.
So I can feel you there. What about just the actual installation of it and things like, were you concerned that it would be soundproof enough? Or was there anything about how you sealed it or caulked it? Or did you use some kind of acoustic caulk or any of that kind of crazy things that people will be asking themselves when they try and think about building their studio?
Yeah, and the funny thing was the door was pretty much the exact same size of the opening. So one side was literally butted up to brick, solid. I mean, thick. That's people who look at the pictures will see the fireplace. So I had to tie into that on one side, and then the other side I had to frame out a little. I mean, it was all of. Let me look at it here. It's maybe, I don't know. It's maybe a foot by 8 foot tall section of wall that I had to frame out for the other side of the door to mate up to. And so, honestly, everywhere I've worked outside of, of course, when I was at Sony Tree and then, some stuff that we did in town, Ocean Way, stuff like that. I was used to working in less than perfect environments, meaning, if a little bit of bleed happens here and there, I whatever, never bothers me at all. So honestly, just to have something to stop the noise from being wide open, blowing through was enough for me. And it's not perfect, but it's enough for me to, like I said, just be sane. So literally, tied it to the brick, built that little section of wall, threw some insulation in there, drywalled, and then just trimmed it out nice with wood, and caulked and painted it, and that's it.
Cool.
And the difference it makes is astonishing. So,
and you said you chose a glass door.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's not a sliding door; it's a swinging door.
It's actually it's an 8-foot. It's a 3 foot, 36-inch by 8-foot swinging door is what it is. So
8 feet tall, not 8 feet wide.
Yeah, great. Yeah, 8 feet tall.
Okay, dig. And then did you have to do anything tricky with like the seals around the door where you close it and it sort of like does some sort of airtight seal, or is it just a regular old door jam? I mean, does that matter?
It does a little bit. I put just a bottom seal on it that's just like a drags on the floor, and it did make a little bit of a difference, but you're not talking 5 or 6 dB of noise difference. You're talking maybe a 0.75,
Right.
But I did do that though. So,
but that's encouraging. So, I mean, basically, and the reason I'm digging into these questions is because I know that, any of us who are facing a should I put a door in here question are wondering all these same things and how fancy do you have to get with it. But, I'm hearing you say that just putting in a door at all makes enough of a difference for you to be real glad that you did it.
It does. Yep. It for sure does. So,
cool.
Because what was previously there, like I said, was just like a sliding barn door, but it didn't really even make full contact with anything when it was closed. And then you lose your point of view too,
Right.
You lose that, which is a big thing. So,
right. So that's smart. So you did the glass for the door so you can see through it and see the band out there. And then I think it's also encouraging to know that, a glass door instead of a solid core door can still, yet again, like helps enough that you're like feeling much better about the situation.
Yep. For sure. Yep.
And then so tell us a little bit more about the rest of your studio space there. How do you like to set things up, and what are you using?
Yeah, I mean, as far as to record with, I acquired now this was during the move from Nashville back to Ohio. Of course, we're all online junkies and read and stuff like that. And I was looking for a smaller format analog board for some time, and just stumbled across there's a Yamaha that was made 70s 80s the PM 2000, which not a whole lot of people know a whole lot about them, but there was actually a guy, you've probably heard his name mentioned many times before, but his name was Fletcher from Mercenary Audio.
Oh yeah.
And he swore upon these things a while back, and so I started looking into them, and you can find them, and very few can you find, but I found one that was all the way on the West Coast that was apparently decommissioned from Disney at one point, and then got shipped to Oregon, and a guy there serviced it for me, and then I bought it from that fellow there in Oregon, and it shipped all the way from there to Northeast Ohio here. So I decided to put that in, and then I'm just still using a lot of my outboard stuff that I'd had while during Nashville. I'm just, running literally about 32 channels of preamps into just the Apollo 16 and Apollo 8s. And that's pretty much what I use. And, and as far as, I don't normally mix on the desk a whole lot. I'm kind of an in the box guy for sure.
But they got good mic pre's though, right? They're useful for that.
The pre's are great. And honestly, the EQ section's fantastic too. I've got, some 1073, the heritage ones that were pretty costly, and I mean it's not far off on any of that even. People say that this year, these years of consoles, the Yamaha actually they copied the EQ section from a 1073, and then the preamp section from an API. Now, how true that is, there's no telling. But I know that that's what they were trying to model their circuits on, based off of those designs back then.
That's cool.
And
it's funny when you think about Yamaha. Every once in a while, I pause. I'm like, wait a minute. This is the same company's making a console in the 70s for your studio, or they're making a ski mobile for somebody,
Yes.
a little further north.
Yeah.
Or they're making a trumpet for somebody's band.
Yeah. That's the truth. It's just crazy, and we're listening on our NS10s, it's just, it's something else to think that they were able to do all that. But, I believe too, I was told when this board was new, it was $60,000, which, sounds like a little chunk of change back then, but you compare that to an API or a Neve, yeah.
Well, dig it. All right. So you got a console, you got your Pro Tools with the Apollo for your interface. Maybe since you brought up Apollo, why don't you describe a little bit about how you use the mixer that comes with Apollo that sort of lets you set up your headphones properly. And I know that it does things like you can do zero latency plug-in processing and things like that, I believe. Do you use any of those features? Have you found like a system for tracking a band that seems to work really well for you for headphones and setting all that up?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I love UA's plugins. I mean, they're natural sounding, great sounding. I use them mainly just to track through on a couple things, and I don't use them on everything, but their Fairchild stuff, their Pultec stuff, some of their tape things are just are nice, to just run while you're tracking. But I'll generally run those across drums, stuff like that. And then, for other things, I will just use like outboard generally. But as far as it's, Console 2.0 is the software. And, I just use that for all the live mics monitoring. And then playback, I just generally just use Pro Tools actual monitoring for that to do playback with. So they work pretty good together, I think. So
I'm trying to picture, because I don't use UA yet or the Apollo, but you have a Yamaha mixer, but you're really using that as mic pre's and EQs for like individual channels to get the sound into the Apollo.
Yeah, literally just front end. Yep.
And then once it's in the Apollo, then the Console 2.0 is taking all that input signal and sending it immediately back out to the headphones and routing it so that the headphones don't have a delay or latency going on, right?
Correct. Yep.
And then that's feeding also to Pro Tools, and you're listening to the return of Pro Tools in the control room?
Correct. Yep. And actually, when I'm tracking, I'm actually listening to the live mics based out of Console 2.0, because all those are fed right to the control room speaker. So now playback, obviously is the monitor left and right out of Pro Tools. So
okay, cool, man. Dig it. Well, thanks for breaking it down to the basics for us. All right, and then tell us a little bit more about your studio setup there. Where would you put a band if you were recording? How would you set them up in your space?
Generally, like it's what's cool about this for me is it's still, I guess it's always a learning process, but it is still a fairly new space to me. So each project that comes in that is a band is just an amazing learning experience for me with this new room. But generally, drums and guitar will go in control room, and then I can run just a bass direct, and drums and guitar go in live room, obviously.
Right, live room. Sorry, no worries.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll kind of hide a guitar amp. I've got a little cabinet that's surrounded in brick that I'll ISO the guitar amp with, so the guitar player can be in there, but the amp's isolated. Stuff like that. But then generally, when they're doing their thing, I'll have the bass player sitting in here with me, plugged in direct, putting bass down that way. And then the last session I did here, we had a scratch vocal going down in the control room, bass was going down in control room, live drums were going down in live room, and then electric guitar was going down in live room all at the same time. So
cool.
So yeah.
Dig it. I feel like that describes a lot of studio situations too, where you might have a control room and another space to record, and, figuring out how to sort of arrange everybody to make that work the best.
Yeah, for sure.
When you're recording bass in the control room, how often do you like to have that bass player in headphones versus hearing the bass straight through the speakers?
Tell you what, now that I put that door in, we literally had a scratch vocal and the bass player listening here over speakers, and we were able to talk over top of it as he was putting the bass down with the band actually playing,
That's great.
So that for me was like an aha moment where, okay, this is great. Now I always, I think for me, I'm always just, I trust what's coming out of the speakers, and I don't trust anything till I hear what's coming out of the speakers,
Right.
So for sure.
Dig it. All right. Let's see what I want to ask you. Maybe let's rewind a little bit and tell us more about you. I mean, I was jumping forward quickly there, but I wanted to just get a picture of your space and your studio. Yeah. But let's rewind and tell us more about starting out being in Nashville and some of the stuff you learned working with Sony ATV Tree, and just kind of fill us in, give us a brief fill in there.
Yeah, I mean, I moved there in 2004 upon finishing up with Full Sail. I almost went to New York and had an interview and an offer in New York to go there and to intern there, but and it was a paid internship. But I mean, what pay there was, it was, you still couldn't afford to live at that point, So I decided to go back to school, talk to the person at school, and then they kind of got me hooked up there with Pat Mcmakin. And so yeah, I just kind of moved to Nashville. I knew it was a little bit slower pace too than of course Manhattan. So seemed like a great place to go to get on board and start a family down the road, stuff like that. So I went there, interned at Sony. Just fantastic learning experience. It taught me many. So back when I was young, from where I'm at here in Ohio, I was always that kid that would kind of get made fun of. I got called the tuning Nazi and this and that. I'm thinking, well, yeah, but you need to play in tune, I was hearing things that other people weren't hearing per se. And so,
and is this is post Nashville once you're back in Ohio and you?
No, so I grew up here originally, and this was before I went off to learn the craft. I'd play in bands when I was a teenager, and people just weren't hearing stuff the way what I felt, I was hearing. And so, upon arrival there at Sony and being able to sit in some of those sessions and hear just terms being used about intonation and about pocket, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. It was almost like, okay, you're in the right place, because these people are hearing things that you're hearing. And then there were times that I realized, oh my gosh, I need to learn, because I'm not even hearing what they're talking about, So it was amazing to be able to, and of course, pretty much as an intern, you're just setting up mics, taking mics down, wrapping cables, making coffee, making liquor runs, that kind of stuff, So
do you remember any of the first things that people would talk about where you're like, you didn't know what it was they were talking about?
I would say probably pitch related things on a lead vocal at that time, or little vocal things that I thought, oh man, well, of course you keep your mouth shut as an intern, you never say anything. But you sit back there and you think, wow, I didn't hear that. And then all of a sudden, singer would go in there, sing it again per instruction of the producer at that time. And you're like, okay, I could hear it sounds better though, Yeah. So
I sort of remember being enthusiastic about the music that was happening in the studio. And, somebody would do a first performance and I'm like, oh my God, it's so great. It's so inspired.
Yeah.
And then maybe the producers would push for, another take or keep moving from there. And I think sometimes I had trouble keeping my mouth shut about it. Where I'm like, oh, but that was you're crazy. That was luckily I didn't get fired for saying anything like that. But I do remember that, and I wonder if it's that. I wonder about it. I wonder if at that point you sort of have a sense of something really truly being great initially, or whether it's like you said, we just didn't understand how much better it could be yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and that is debatable, because you figure some of those things that were made to perfection, right? I mean, that's a whole other podcast in itself, especially with modern music. But, something made to that much of perfection, is it really better, or is it better, So,
Right.
so,
Right. Well, all right, cool. So you spent a lot of time, and the studio situation for you in Nashville, was it a lot of songwriter demo sessions, or what was the nature of the sessions you were doing?
Yeah. Now, post 2004 in my Sony internship, I just went back to just a day gig for quite some time, and just literally one by one, I went out, I played, I found people that I liked, and I, just offered them my services, started literally producing out of a, an apartment over in Bellevue,
Mm-hmm.
and so turned out that, and that's how it is. I think with what we do, one thing should always lead to the next, hopefully, if we're doing our job correctly. And that's kind of what happened for me. I remember leaving my internship that day and thinking, oh man, I wonder if I'll really ever set foot back in this place again, just because, it was a tricky time. I feel like, it still is a tricky time, as far as trying to make an income, and steady income at this. But I knew that wasn't what was going to guarantee me a steady income at that point. So you think, oh, well, will I ever come back to this? Will I ever be back in this building? But I mean, our passion, once it's in your blood, it doesn't ever go away. That's the thing I've learned over time. But all that to say, one by one, I literally just would go out, offer my services, and just would work with people, and really work very affordably, sometimes to the point where it ended up leading me back into Sony when Kynlie, it was work that I did for someone else that kind of got Kynlie on my radar and got me on hers. And, we worked nonstop for a couple years, just and on nonstop songs. And it kind of got her back and got her, into Sony with a writing deal and, publishing deal and an artist development deal there. And so once I got back into that, the folks that were there at Sony at the time were kind of they were a supporter of what I was doing and how I was doing it. So yeah, they started tossing me, some of their other songwriters, which was just fantastic to have and work with. So,
well, let me ask you this question. So it sounds like, you were picking individual artists, singers and singer-songwriters to work
Correct.
with. So working with an individual. So would that mean that a lot of times it's just the two of you in your studio and you're programming drums and things like that?
Yeah, well, and I'm a drum. Drums were my first instrument. So when I was in an apartment, obviously that was when, BFD was brand new and came out, and it was like having to learn a whole other instrument, how to make, fake drums sound real. And so fast forward a little bit when I was able to, buy a house and stuff like that and get back to recording real drums again, but it was generally me and a singer-songwriter. I would say 99.9% of the time. And I would start with an acoustic guitar vocal that I would have them come in. We would, do the arrangement, make sure we were happy with it, make sure the key was right, make sure the tempo was right. We would flesh it out to just a click track on either piano or, like I said, acoustic guitar, and just do a couple scratch vocal passes. The client would then leave, and then I would go off and I would build the track. And 99.9% of the time it was me having to play all the parts myself. So, which I love doing. But there's, as I've learned, being able to work with whole bands now in a space like this, there's such beauty in having a team effort,
Right.
And there are pluses and negatives to each. It is great to be able to play all the parts too. I mean, for me, that's when I feel like I'm in my glory, when I'm able to sit there and create and invent,
It's a lot of fun. And it's interesting hearing you talk about that process, because when you put down an acoustic and a vocal, especially if the vocal's really good, or maybe even a keeper vocal, before you add all those other elements, then it gives you the opportunity to add anything being fully informed of whether or not it's going to fit.
Right. Right. For sure. Yeah. And I'll say for the longest time too, I would get all the rhythm stuff set, the pocket right. If it was supposed to feel programmed, make sure it feels programmed. If it was supposed to feel like a live band, make sure it felt like a live band. And that's a whole thing in itself too, especially when you're the only instrumentalist playing on a song sometimes. What I've come to do now is I have put more emphasis on getting the finished vocal before anything else. And before anything else, as long as there's something there playing a straight melody through the song that's there, get that vocal as soon on as you can, because any song that you look back over the course of history, if you take any song that has moved your soul and moved your heart, if you were to mute out everything except a lead vocal and an acoustic instrument, whether it be a piano or vocal, that song should still stand on its own. You know what I mean? And so I feel like now I try to get that finished vocal as early in the process as I can, and then produce around that,
How do you know that you have the right elements under which to create that finished vocal? Like the right bass elements for that vocal to sing to?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think, again, it's just being able to have a vocal that when you hear it with an acoustic guitar or a piano and have it move your soul, it's a good enough vocal. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then, it's different. Normally, like now, Aaron B. Thompson, who's on the west coast of Canada, obviously we can't work together in person that often. So being at a distance, it's the same thing kind of for him too. I will get his work tape, and then I'll generally build him just something to cut his vocal to, which it'll consist of a keys track, maybe a bass track, and then just a loop that I put together, and then everything else kind of, that loop becomes our click track for the whole song, so.
I think in some of the videos I saw, there was like somebody's back playing piano in the video. Is that you in the YouTube videos that we included in the playlist?
That was probably me. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That was me.
Right on, dude. Let me see here. I want to dig into some more specifics. You talked about, using BFD. Give us some insights into creating, fake drums for a production where you can't play a full drum set in your studio. What are some things that you learned about that? What are some smart ways to approach the songs, building the track before you even put the vocals on?
I think, where we're at now, some of these libraries have gotten amazing. And now, depending on how you like to put things down, you could either trigger them, via some sort of MIDI controller or whatnot. But
yeah, do you do that sometimes?
I do if I'm just doing that kind of a production. If it has to be a pop production, I will sit here and I just have a little key controller, and I just use the keyboard on it.
Okay, but you never went the route of like a complete MIDI controller, fake drum kit or anything like that?
No, never did. And that was partly due to the fact of affordability back then when I had to make myself have drums. I think learning to play drums on an actual keyboard, it's like teaching yourself a whole other instrument, I feel like. But
yeah.
But now, there's some really affordable options that have little pads on them and stuff like that, and then, like I said, some of these libraries, there's a fellow, Dustin Burnett there in Nashville has I Want That Sound. And, oh my goodness, their stuff is just, it's great. It's great for everything, so you can use it in pop, you can use it in Americana, you can use it in just about any genre,
It's really geared towards the songwriter production too, right?
It is, for sure. Yep.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think that's good insight because, you describe yourself as a drummer. And if your answer was not, I have to get a MIDI controlled drum kit and play it with sticks, then I think that's good insight for us. I remember hearing Matt Mahaffey talk about programming drums at one point, and he said something to me about like, make sure that your kick and your snare, that you're playing them from the same hand or something like that. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's other things too, where, I've seen so many times where it's like the drummer has three hands, but it's like, but based off of what's played. So if you're trying to fake people into thinking that they're real drums, you always have to be conscientious of, okay, well, there's no way he can hit that cymbal when he's in the middle of doing a fill with two hands, so stuff like that.
Have you ever played around with Logic's drummer track?
I've seen it a little bit, but I haven't actually messed around with it. No.
Well, I guess it's similar to the other stuff you were talking about where there's drum libraries.
Yeah.
But I know that sometimes, you pull up a plugin and it's got these grooves in it, and then you're like, you just sort of assemble chunks for grooves. Have you found that to be a useful way of building up music, or do you find like that's too limiting because it doesn't let you create the groove that you want?
Yeah, I mean, like again, me being a drummer, I'm at a point now where if it's something like that, and something else too, maybe I'm a little old fashioned this way and it sounds quite tedious, but there's times that I literally drag and drop an entire session, entire song worth of drums on nice. Each hit, just because it gives you a different feel. There's something about it, but
so wait, let me see if I understand what you're saying. You're saying you borrow the drums from a different song to start a new song, or you're just using multi-tracks to build your drums?
Well, like for instance, in Pro Tools, I'll create, a kick track, and then I'll go into my sample library and I'll find a kick hit that I like. Mm-hmm. And I will literally drag and drop that, everywhere I want it for the entire duration of the song. In
other words, instead of using MIDI programming, you'll just place the audio files. Yeah.
Yep. And it can be done that way. I'd be willing to bet some of the, most popular music we're hearing now was probably programmed that way, So
that was sort of the way I used to do it whenever I would do that. I mean, sometimes I'll mess with MIDI, but a lot of times it would just be placing kicks and snares. What about, all the subdivisions of drums? Would you have placed hi-hats and things, or would you have overdubbed a hi-hat to that?
I've done both. For some reason too, I feel like we're in an age where a lot of the cymbal related stuff, at least for the genres of music that I keep coming to me, the cymbal stuff is actually a very, very small part of the sound of the song. So sometimes there's not even a hi-hat in the entire song. There's not even a cymbal crash, but you're substituting the subdivisions with something else, some other sound, whether it be, a shaker or something absolutely out in left field. There's been days where I've gotten bored here and I've said, well, you know what, instead of using someone else's sample library, let me just go and make my own. So I'll go in, I'll put up a mic and just record the weirdest transient hits I could think to use, like coffee cups. I have this couch that when you hit it with a mallet, you would never believe that it was, wasn't a kick drum, but a weird sounding kick drum at that. So,
right. Followed by the coughing sound of choking on dust.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yes.
No, just kidding. I'm sure your couch isn't like that. Actually, I've seen the photos of your studio. It's really quite beautiful, Rockstars. Your website is courtstreetrecording.com, and you've got a bunch of beautiful photos of the place. Really nice, just wood everywhere you look. It's just wood.
Yeah.
Which is great. Yeah. Must sound awesome in there.
Yeah, it does. I'll tell you, it's, at least when I was in Nashville, most of the spaces I had there that weren't professional studios, that were studios within my homes, because we probably changed homes, I would say about 3 times before we, in the 14 years that, my wife and I and son were there. And so, but all the places I was in had low ceilings and they were tight spaces as far as the sound goes. So now I'm in hog heaven up here because for the first time ever, I'm thinking, man, you can make a big space sound smaller, but it's oftentimes harder to make a small space sound bigger.
Right.
And so that's what I'm loving here now, is because the sound of that room. I was watching a Steve Albini video years ago, and just how he lays a small diaphragm condenser down on the floor, at each back side of the room, and to just pull those faders up with the drums. I mean, it's it's quite a sound, so I'm happy.
That's very cool. And then I'm also noticing that you have a fireplace, which you mentioned earlier, but it literally goes between your control room and the live room, and you glassed it off so that it's like it looks like it. Is it like a glass control room window that used to be a fireplace?
Yeah, it is glass, and that is actually removable. Now that was there when we got here, and so I had to there was definitely some air passing through there that I did not want. So I had to seal it up a little bit better since those pictures. But I mean, it's still, still glass for sure.
Cool idea.
Yeah. It's crazy. So that this part of the house that we're in, was added on in the 60s. The main house is, we laugh. I said, man, there's not a 45-degree angle anywhere or a level floor anywhere, So.
That's awesome. Well, hey, let's take a break for a minute and we'll come back in for the jam session. Rockstars, our guest again today is Michael Estok from Ohio, talking about his studio. And when we come back, Michael, I want to dig into talking more about some of the specifics on the records that you've produced and recorded that are included in the YouTube playlist. And then also let's talk about songwriting and stuff like that.
Sounds great.
Down with that. All right. So Rockstars, links are in the show notes as always. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not on YouTube, go subscribe to our YouTube channel and check it out. You can get the podcast there as well. And make sure to hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and then drop in a comment below too, and share any thoughts or insights that you enjoyed from this podcast. And I'll ask it again here. Michael, have you got any questions for the Rockstars that you want them to answer in the comments below?
Oh, what would I like to know from that? That's a trick question here. Let's see. I think a good thing to be is, a good thing for me that would interest me is, do the rock stars feel like they need to move to a music hub, or are they realizing that they can make music in their own hometown per se? I'm curious to hear where we're at on something like that.
I love that question. That's a great one. So yeah, drop in a comment if you're on YouTube, or if you're just on the blog, you can go down to the comment section there. And we'll see you guys in just a minute for the jam session. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you are ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you are using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to mix in your own studio, and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Other World Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your existing Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD drive, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. Hey, Rockstars. We're going to jump back into the jam session now. My guest today is Michael Estok, joining us from Canfield, Ohio, in Northeast Ohio. Got a beautiful studio there called Court Street Recording. And are you ready to jam, Michael?
I'm ready to jam, Lidge.
All right, kick it, man. Let's talk about some of the records that you've done, because you, as usually, have collected your music and put it into a YouTube playlist. So Rockstars, you can check that out right on the show notes and go listen to some of these records. You worked with a band called the Vindies, and the singer in that band just got a massive dynamic range between the verses and the choruses. And I wondered if you could talk about how you approached that. How did you record a vocalist like that? How'd you mix that?
Yeah, she is, her name is Jackie Popovic, and she is just absolute amazing singer. Signal processing for her, I just tracked through just a large diaphragm, just a Wonder Audio CM67 microphone is kind of what I used on her. And then I want to say we just hit that with, I believe that was an actual, the Heritage 1073, I believe is what we used. And then just into an 1176 straight in,
Nice.
And no more than I would say 4 dB of gain reduction going in. I don't like to overly use compression on the tracking stage for anything. So,
do you have one of those Warm Audio 1176s?
Yeah, that is what I used. Yep, indeed. Cool. Yeah. It does its job, and generally I want to say for something like that vocal too, and this is for most things I do. I go in with clip gain and just try to get everything in the same ballpark, so I'm not overworking the compressor overly, hard in one section of the song versus the other, And so that's generally, she does have a lot of dynamic range when she belts, man. It crushes. So.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was noticing. It sounded great despite all this huge, variation in level.
Yeah,
and I know that can be really challenging. Did you say what your ratio was that you would like to use on like an 1176 like that?
It was just 4-1 on something like that. So.
Yeah, it's funny with 1176s because that 4-1 ratio gets used almost all the time by me.
All the time, yep.
Like when do we ever switch it to others? I've done it just because I feel like I have to push it outside the box.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to remember if Richard Dodd had even mentioned doing like 20-1 ratios on the podcast. Awesome. But like, it's funny, I mean, how often do you experiment with the other settings on the 1176?
I've done bass a couple times with an 8-1 and I've made some drum samples with all buttons in and just to have just some overly crushed snare and kick hits, if I ever fly something into a pop song. So, yeah. So, I mean, I like to mess around with it quite a bit. But for vocals and guitars and acoustic guitars, I mainly stays parked there at 4-1. And then I'm kind of one of those people too that I'm always like, attack time is all the way normally to the left for me, which is the slowest attack time. And then release time is, always normally all the way to the right for me. So
that was my next question is how often do you play around with those different settings?
Yeah.
It's one of those things where sometimes I play with it and I'm like, that's cool. I dialed it in. Then later I come back, I'm like, is it better when I just put it back to all the way left and all the way right?
When I leave it where I'm familiar with.
Yeah. So that's funny insight on that.
Okay, cool. I will say too, Jim Stewart actually, was kind enough to mix that song for us. So
cool.
So not only it's part of that final vocal sound falls on him too. I will say. But
do you have any insights into how he might have mixed the vocals on that?
I never asked him. I just said, "Oh, that sounds good, Jim." So.
The only thing you asked him is, "Can I have that now?"
Yeah, exactly.
Cool, man. All right, we'll dig it. So let's talk about Aaron B. Thompson. That's an artist you've worked with a bunch. That is the artist that's in Vancouver, right?
Yeah, he is. He's on a small island off of Vancouver, off the coast of Vancouver there. Comox is where he's at. But he's one of the most prolific songwriters I've come into contact with in my entire career. It's crazy when you're at Sony and you see staff songwriters who are absolutely amazing. and some of them that I would interact with would send me songs, but Aaron is a whole other level of, he'll send me 5 or 6 songs a week sometimes,
Wow.
so it's crazy. The boy can write. So.
Okay. So let's begin by just talking about the technicals of working with somebody remotely like that. Mm-hmm. What are some things you've learned about ways that work to do something and send it over the internet? Does he send you a Pro Tools session or how does that work?
We tried that Pro Tools collab for a while, and it ended up just something about it. Maybe the stage that it was in and that we were in both. It almost seemed like it took longer than our old tried and true method of just, when he gives me an idea, I generally will kind of flesh out what I feel to be the proper tempo for it. And then instead of sending him a click track, I'll send him some sort of percussion track instead, with just like, basic diamond chords, which is whole notes, for the skeleton of the song. And then he'll go ahead and cut his vocals over top of that, and then acoustic guitar over that. So,
okay, well, let me rewind. So he'll have an idea for a song. Will he send you like an iPhone voice memo sketch of something?
Yeah, I mean, when we first started working together, that's what it was. But he's, I've kind of helped him transition a little bit to get where, now he's just using like a Focusrite Scarlett, which actually does quite a fine job at recording vocals. He's using something like the Scarlett, and I want to say he's using one of those Aston microphones, I believe.
Yeah. Those guys make great mics.
Yeah. So it's, that's generally what he's on now. So, but it'll, again, it'll just be an acoustic guitar vocal or piano vocal that he first sends me,
Okay. So then he sends you that and then you take that and would you sort of like chart out the song and learn it and then recreate it from zero? Or would you load that in and play along to it and it's already on a click kind of thing?
Yeah. And that's something that I would highly suggest too for any of the listeners is get people doing those to a click, because it takes a lot, if you're working via distance, it takes a lot of time out of the equation to be able to, when they first birth their creation of a song, to be able to just fly that right into Pro Tools and have it sync up to the grid, and so that's kind of what I do now is with what he sends me, he even tracks his work tapes a lot of times to click, and I'll just fly him right into Pro Tools and set the session for that tempo. And then if it's something I feel like needs to slow up or slow down, we can change the tempo of the overall, since it's just a scratch via, Elastic Audio or whatnot.
Right.
So.
Okay. So then you've got that in as a guide track, and then you would find the click, make sure you've got a proper click. And what are some of the challenges with picking the right tempo? Because again, you don't have the artist, you don't have the singer right there going, "Oh, that feels good."
Yeah, I think you can hear it in their vocal pocket a lot of times. Sometimes we'll run a test to a track. We'll just have him run one pass, hear how he's singing at that tempo, and then speed it up or slow it down accordingly. The whole thing is to not be rushed if you don't want it to be rushed, and you don't want to be too far behind. So it's got to just fit in there right. And I think that's always what, for me, will dictate the tempo is if you feel like you've got space to move properly around a rhythmic meter. So.
And lyric, right? If the lyrics start to jumble, if it's too fast. Yeah.
Too many words in too short period of time. Yeah, you have to be mindful of that for sure.
Do you find sometimes the opposite too? Like if there's space between lyrics, then it starts feeling it feels too slow because the lyrics are getting too far spaced out.
Yep, it can easily drag. There's been times where and honestly, and it's not to overanalyze things, but obviously we do what we do for a reason. 1 BPM for me can make or break the feel of an entire song. I really do believe that. And I know it sounds over analytical, but
well, you're a drummer first, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's something I've really noticed is that drum grooves, there's like a natural way that they fall together. All the these 3 limbs or these 4 limbs that are playing, and And if the tempo's wrong, the drummer sometimes just can't you can't play that groove anymore. You're going to have to play something different if it's a little too slow or too fast.
Exactly. Yep.
So that was one of the questions I wanted to ask is when you're arriving at that tempo for the song he sent you, do you like to do it from a drummer's perspective or from a guitarist's perspective or pianist?
Probably now you're saying when I get the work tape sent from him, do I go at it via, a lot of times what I'll do is first a drummer's perspective, honestly, because and that's where, if it's 2-click, I could start flying some little components of percussion elements into it, whether it be a shaker. I could see where do we place the kicks in the song? Do we do it? Do we keep it right on the beat? Do we swing it? What do we,
Right.
I feel like that's for me, it's definitely probably the first and foremost thing that I would do, when working with someone like him. So,
well, there's something funny that I've noticed where I can be in the control room and I can listen to a song and I could go, oh, this needs a shaker. And I can be totally confident about, this percussion element. And then I go out to go play it. And I'm out there, I'm like, holy shit, you can't play that part to this. Like, it doesn't feel right at all somehow.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very weird like that, Speaking of shakers too, maybe we can talk about that. But, you know how there's a difference between the shaker that's sort of the forward and the backward shake is totally equal. It's like a straight shake versus the one where you've got the accent.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know if you got any thoughts about that stuff.
It's tricky, and like I said, a lot of the stuff I'm doing, if it's percussion and it's shakers, it's generally probably programmed percussion shakers. And believe it or not, a lot of those scratch tracks that are percussion tracks, shakers, will often be, they'll be in the final track. As far as playing shaker, I don't know too much. I mean, I try to do the best I can. I see so many amazing percussion players that can swing a beat on a shaker, stuff like that. I'm kind of more of a straight guy, so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. All right. Well, so let's see. What's the next stage after that? So you've picked the tempo, you add some stuff to it, and how soon do you send it back to Aaron?
Soon as I say I have a basic rhythmic, basic, musical idea for the song, it goes straight back to him. He runs normally, I would say at most 6 passes of vocals, and sends those to me, and then I comp, edit the vocal, get it exactly how I want it, and then from that point on is when I'll go ahead and do all the hopefully what sounds like air candy after that, other instruments, guitars, pads, that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, cool. And then what are some of the tools that you use to send something back and forth?
So everything that we use to send, like when I print a, mix for him, is just generally sent over iMessage MP3.
Right.
So,
okay.
And when he shares his passes with me, it's just good old fashioned Dropbox,
So you guys would share a Dropbox folder and just be opening and closing the same session, or would you send a link back and forth and then you have to re-download it? I know these are geeky questions, but honestly, that's the stuff that I deal with every time I'm doing this sort of thing.
Well, I'm like I'm a file management. I believe it's one of the other most important things that any of us could do this day and age is stay organized. And so what I do is when I create a Pro Tools session, right, for one particular song, I instantly go into that folder and I create a progress folder and I tag it with a little red dot on it there. Mm-hmm. And at any point when I print something or bounce something, it gets put in that progress folder. So it's always part of that. So when that anything that gets backed up, that progress folder will always be in there. For instance, another thing too that I will do is when Aaron sends me his vocals to download for me to fly back into my Pro Tools session, I will create another folder that's vocals. So and it lives outside the audio files folder. So it's just a way for me to kind of keep track and stay sane on everything, because with the back and forth, it can get tricky quick, and especially with iMessage and stuff like that. If you're sending mixed prints during iMessage, that stuff can get easily lost. Just by the sheer volume of interaction between your clients back and forth via text message. So if I need to reference something that he liked or something that they liked from an earlier print, I can always go back to that progress folder, and there it is.
Okay, so when you do the music and send it to Aaron, do you send him an MP3 of a mix of all the music and drums you've done, and then he just cuts vocals to that, or do you actually send him the whole Pro Tools folder?
Nope, I just send him a stereo left and right, just a mix. Yep.
Okay, and then when he sends the vocals back, same thing. He just sends you 6 audio files in a folder in Dropbox or something?
Yep, just 6, 24, 48 waves.
See, that's great. And I think that's really insightful and helpful, because technology sometimes offers us all these fancy options. You can collaborate, you can use Dropbox, you can share the session, do all this stuff. And time and time I see it again with really prolific, creative people that are making great music, that they don't fuck around with that stuff. They just keep it really simple. It's like, here's an MP3, record what you're going to do to that, and send them back. Now, the ones that he sends you shouldn't be MP3s. The keeper takes, of course, need to be the good resolution WAV files. But the track that you're actually using to play to can just be an MP3 stereo file, Now, one trick that I know that we deal with a lot here is if you're going to bounce a reference mix for somebody to record to, make sure you start your bounce at 0 so that all their files start at 0 and line back up again later.
Yeah, that is the key thing is keeping everything so it always lines up, So, generally, musicians are, I should say, clients have had to become engineers themselves this day and age. So most of them kind of get, at least that I've worked with, have luckily gotten the concept of how a DAW needs to line up. But yes, 0 is very, very important. It saves us engineers that are actually working on the project a lot of frustration and time to, have to try to manually line up audio files. So lining that stuff up is not a lot of fun. There are some tricks that will help you do it. If somebody sends you files that don't start at 0 and they were overdubbing to some, MP3 that also didn't start at 0, get them to send you the same MP3 back. Yeah. Because then you can lock that together with the new vocals and then scoot that MP3 until it lines up with your session, because it might have the same kick drum that starts out the song or something like that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's talk about writing and co-writing, and also working with an artist like Aaron, for example, where you're collaborating over the internet. We don't have to get into too much of the kind of business arrangements of that specific artist, but just the concept of that. If somebody's like, oh, that sounds like a blast, man, that sounds awesome. Now, does this mean I have to go somehow find somebody who needs my services and hires me to record all this fun stuff all the time? Or what does it look like if you say, hey, I'm going to co-write with somebody and create a bunch of music together like that? Do you do a lot of co-writing, and you obviously spent a long time around it. What kind of insights can you share with us about, the power of co-writing and how to begin a process and go through it where, you don't sort of feel left out in the cold later on?
I would say right now at this point in my life, I don't do co-writing, just for the mere fact of how do you, logically recoup your time put into something. If you co-write, is there an expectation there for you to do the project for free, that kind of stuff,
right.
That's a tricky balance. Now there are other instances where a co-write, if going into it and you're willing to take a risk, like for instance, if it's something that could be a film and television placement and you get the opportunity to pitch with another writer, something like that, that's a wholly different situation, I would say, because there's a chance there's a chance at a near instant payout on some stuff like that. But if it's a performing artist, who is selling CDs on a smaller scale, stuff like that, it's a tricky situation to get involved in.
Right. You're saying the co-writing opportunity is a will you record my record for free in disguise opportunity sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and it's luckily, I haven't ever come across that. People seem to have always been respectful of my time and my efforts, but I'm sure there are scenarios out there, and I've heard of scenarios out there that have existed like that, but that's the main thing to look out for. And then the second thing would be if you're a writer and you want to co-write and you're also a producer, then, anyone that would be worth your time can easily, in my mind, should easily be able to talk to you about finances and money like that. That's just part of being a professional, I feel like in our industry. So, make a specific arrangement for what you're working on, and just, it's, to me, you have to watch out for each other. That's the only thing that matters. Right. Is it good for that person, and is it good for you both? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So.
All right, dig it, man. This is good advice. So let's talk about the process that it probably is happening for you, as you described, where you're working for hire to record a song for somebody, even if it's remotely, and you're adding a bunch of instrumentation and stuff. What are some good tips and strategies for the rock stars, as far as, some of them might be thinking, well, should I be figuring out some kind of hourly rate or day rate, or is it per overdub? What are some things to think about for them as far as how to figure out, well, I really want to play a lot more guitar and drums on stuff and produce it, but how do I bill for that?
Yeah. Generally the way I will do it is if it's a band inside my studio, it's an hourly rate. Okay. And then now, if it's a song where I am producing, playing every instrument, I will generally find out pretty quickly, the amount of time I need to allot to get a song done. You can generally figure that out by how many instruments, the style of music, and so when it's something like that, I just will come up with a per song rate for a lot of people. And, of course, if it's just someone who's wanting to do guitar tracks, then I would charge, probably go back to the hour and do this many hour minimum for what you're trying to add,
Right.
And you could charge by the track too. So
right. Those are all very smart answers, I think, and finding out maybe what that artist has got for a budget and what they're trying to accomplish and all that kind of stuff. Let's keep digging in though. Let's break it down more. So for a rock star who's thinking, that sounds really cool, but I haven't done enough of this to know how to calculate that. Can you just kind of like on the spot here, let's go through a little bit of a mental process of breaking down a song production and the way you think about it. It's like, okay, well, it's something like that might take this kind of time. Let's say I came to you with a song and I was like, yeah, man, can you produce a song? Yeah, I can record my vocals, but are you, I understand that you can play drums and bass and guitar and stuff like that. What are like, specifically, how do you start to break that time down in your brain?
When it normally ends up going on an invoice, and that's been the best thing about, just using invoicing, is to literally look at, I list out generally every instrument that was put on the track, and you can get a good idea of what something would be just based off of how many instruments. So for instance, I figure about an hour per instrument, is generally how I would figure, and sometimes there's 5 or 6 guitar tracks, and I've only given myself an hour on that invoice, because honestly, that's all the longer it would take. So it's one of those things that, songs that are super instrument heavy, obviously, you see a lot more hours on that invoice per se. And when you break it down by that, but still give someone a per song price, it generally works out in that person's favor, which is good, because they realize, oh man, this was a fair value for all the time that was actually spent, But I would say a good rule of thumb is, to me, you should, there's been times where I've tracked full band sounding songs in 4.5 hours. There's been times
but playing everything yourself or
Yeah.
actually bringing in musicians too?
No, playing everything myself. You figure if you give yourself 2 takes at best to get something down, I mean, at 3 minutes a song, it shouldn't really ever take that long. Now, for some who who are working on their proficiency, I mean, even if you figure you've given yourself an hour per drum track, I mean, that's quite a few passes through on drums to capture what you need,
Yeah, but this is really important. So it's great. I love that we're breaking it down, because implicit in this is that you keep your studio, your drum sets mic'd up. So yeah. you're not needing the time to get a drum sound.
No.
You're just like, I've always got a drum set. It's mic'd up, ready to go. And all I need to do is sit down and play music for an hour.
Yeah. Normally, the only thing I will change on drums is overhead arrangement. And that's, you're talking moving a mic that's already on a stand and switching out a snare drum or switching out a kick drum. I mean, that is generally it for me. So yeah, drums I turn on my console, fire up Pro Tools, arm the record tracks and just go. So.
That's great. That's cool. And that sounds like a lot of fun too. What's some of the stuff actually that is the most fun about adding all the instruments yourself, and what sucks about it?
I think adding it all it's just the entire process of it is, for me, there's no words for it. That it's when I'm genuinely just a happy person, Now where it gets tricky is after you've added all the parts that you feel like are relevant, and then you go to edit, and that's when it becomes a different beast most of the time, and that's why I think it can get tricky. It can be challenging, because there's times that you need to know when it's proper to mute yourself, in a certain spot. There's times that you need to, there's times that there were parts that I thought, oh man, I'm not sure about my pocket on that I had pulled back in a mix, but another producer actually liked the humanness of what I played and wanted it brought out more. So it's hard to be objective at a certain point in the process when you've played everything.
Yeah.
So that's the tricky part. That is by far for me been the hardest part of it,
So what are some methods that you use to get past that? Do you try and put it in the hands of the producer as quickly as possible so that they can begin to give you feedback? Do you just say, I'm just gonna turn myself off right now and not overthink this?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah. And that is the best thing you can do, is get it in the final person who is dictating, the person that you're catering to, the person that you're trying to make happy. The sooner you get it to them, I feel like after you feel comfortable with what you've done, the better, the absolute better. Because, they have a different set of ears than you do on it at that point. And then even beyond that point, I would suggest, there are other certain points where it's good to even, once the edit has gone to that person, to pass it to another mixing engineer, pass it to a different mastering engineer, Now, that's not in everyone's budgets sometimes. So for me, it's been my whole life's learning has been how to try to attempt to do it all,
So, I do feel like we need to back up a tiny bit in this process too, because I feel like there's always a place with certain instruments and overdubs where there's an exploration initially before you know which direction you're going in. And then when you know which direction you're going in, you're trying to get it really right.
Yeah.
And so where do you find it's useful to bounce the exploration off of that other person, that producer or that artist quickly, so they can be like, so you don't waste an hour working on a part that they're like, oh, I don't even like that direction.
No, exactly. Yeah. I think, oftentimes, and this is a really, really good tip, I think for anyone too, is, working from a distance is, when you're in the middle of recording a part that you're feeling really great about and you're feeling really excited and amped up about, take a 2-minute breather to just pull out your iPhone, record a video of it, with a little message and send it to him, and I mean, I know you don't get a true reproduction of what the wave file is going to sound like, but it's enough to give someone an idea picture wise of where you're trying to take a song,
Yeah.
And, and it's crazy because I've seen instances sometimes where, it backfire if you send something too early on in the process, because they're not fully hearing what you're trying to do at that point,
Yeah.
So I've sometimes found a little quick video can just work wonders with that,
That's such a great tip. And you talked about being an iMessage already, and a beauty of iMessage is you typically have direct access to that person because it's a message, not like an email. And then also the video keeps it in that sketch quality, like them sending you the voice memo where it leaves room for your imagination. So maybe you're sending them a version where they can imagine what it's going to be. Whereas if you sent a recorded version of it, it's almost too indelible and people are going to like have a negative reaction or something like that.
Yeah, I have seen that happen where, where it's, oh my goodness, this is too loud. Well, right, but we're not even close to mixing at this point, or that kind of thing. So,
well, it's like me playing anything I'm working on for my daughter in the car. I just want to, what do you think of this? And she just comments on the mix immediately. And she's 13.
Oh man, that's amazing. It's the first place. I think it's the first place people go. Not necessarily. They don't view it from a trying to create something from scratch standpoint per se. It's more of, this isn't done yet sounding,
Right.
So.
Something's too loud. It's always something's too loud.
Yeah.
Or maybe not loud enough, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's great, man. That's a great tip. So the a quick short video where, you go grab coffee and you hopefully get a reply quickly. And then I guess FaceTime is probably a pretty convenient tool if somebody really needs to just see it and give you feedback right away too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing too, it's, I've definitely found keeping a direct line of communication to be the best thing. And, even sometimes that can get misconstrued, but, definitely don't do the email back and forth thing. It's like where there's no, this day and age, I feel like, trying to email and open up a thread that way versus just picking up the phone and just simply calling somebody, or you're always better off that way. They can hear the tone of your voice that way better. So.
That's true. Now I find email is like at the end of the day when I'm printing rough mixes or printing mixes and sending it for somebody to sort of have a copy of that MP3. Email is great for that. If you really want to force somebody to get all their mix notes together and get all the band mix notes together and get their thoughts organized, then an email could maybe be a good place where it's like they know they have to put all their thoughts into one email and send it to you for you to sit down and do it. But
yeah, for sure.
But you're absolutely right. Just that immediate, response to the emotion and the tone of your voice and, just getting the idea across quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me too, like I know I've kind of, I resort to email only when I'm sending a download link to the final thing.
Right.
And it has the invoice attached to it. That's about the only time I think now that I'm even emailing anymore with people. So
yeah. And I like that you talked about that attached to an invoice too. Maybe, do you want to share any tips for the rock stars about, sometimes people are worried like, well, if I send the mix and, and they haven't paid yet, and what if they don't pay and all that kind of stuff? What are your thoughts about that? You must have experienced all versions of getting paid and not getting paid at this point.
I guess I've just been fortunate. I don't know. I've never, me being working with singer-songwriters, it's a fairly intimate relationship that develops over time. So it's never been one of those things where I haven't had some sort of, trust developed already with the client. Right. So, and luckily the few bands that I've worked with since I've been back up here in Ohio have been, it's all been straightforward too. So, I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but maybe the lesson of that is know who you're working with and know what you're getting yourself into, before before you try to collect. So
well, I think it's what you said too about trust developed, which is great.
yeah.
And it is one of those things that's inherent in what we do with music and recording is, typically you're in a creative process, which requires trust already with people you're working with. And if you don't feel that, then maybe you need to take a second look at that project.
Yeah, for sure.
Dig it. All right. Well, let's, here's a couple more questions about some of your productions. Again, Aaron Thompson, Pulse, I think the song was called Pulse, had a nice balance of guitars, and it's got like a pulsing synth in there and drums and stuff. And yet somehow it just seemed like the vocal was sitting right against all those elements. Some are organic, some are electronic. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about knowing when you have the vocal sitting right in a mix. And was that one that you mixed, or again, was that Jim?
Yeah, that one was that one I mixed and mastered here and tracked here. So that was me. I think vocal wise, it's not a debate on how loud for me ever vocal wise is. It's how does it feel as a whole,
right?
And then what I do generally to get my vocal placement is if I can turn my speakers down to where I can whisper over top of it and I'm still hearing every word, then it is plenty loud, and generally I'll do, I think you've probably got one of the Avantones, don't you? The cube.
Yeah, I
cube.
did.
Yeah.
I noticed you've got a pair of them. I only got one. I wish now that I had a pair. But actually, tell us about those.
The funny thing is I actually downsized to one. so I will just generally, I'll generally just throw it in mono on that guy and just do that. And that's what dictates my vocal level there, But getting the initial level set, again, it's how does it feel? There's that thing where I refer to it as karaoke when that vocal is just way too out front, and then obviously there's the debate that could be had about it being too far back, So I don't know. It's that, I will say that is always for me, it's the biggest point of debate between any client I've ever worked with is vocal level, for sure. Because there's really no right or wrong, I feel like, but
there's just whether they like it or not. So for example, when I worked with Ryan Humbert, he was wise enough to keep pushing for us to turn the vocal up in the final mixes.
Yeah.
And he was right. The finals sounded great with his vocals right where they ended up.
Right.
But I got a killer tip for you. So this one comes from Jamie Tate when he was on the podcast. And you're going to be, hopefully you didn't sell your other Avantone cube there.
I still have it, actually. I was getting ready to, though.
No, before you do it, what you do is, and Jamie taught this about his pair of NS10s. So he has one sitting on the counter over to the side, and then the other one's sitting on it in reverse. So the tweeters are not on the same side, but one's on the left and one's on the right.
Yeah.
And they're just stacked right on top of each other. So that from where you're sitting, it's the same thing as a mono mix coming at you. However, you're not summing the left and the right channels together.
Wow.
And what happens is because effects information and reverb information can often be have phase flipped relationships, the summing will cancel out a lot of the effects in that mono mode. Yeah. And if you stack the two speakers, then you could leave it not in mono mode and hear it there where you're getting the effect of mix level decisions, but it's not canceling out your effects.
Wow, look at that. That's
pretty hip,
amazing.
Right?
Wow.
So then the question is, are we making mono mixes so that they work for a left and right sum together? Or are we making mono mixes so that they work when you're, standing away from a stereo speakers,
right? And
you're essentially getting things in mono.
Yeah, that's it. Yep.
And if that's the case, then we probably don't want to lose those effects.
No. Wow. That's brilliant. That was, okay. I'll have to check that out again.
Yeah. In fact, I just saw Jamie Tate last night at the Sterling Sound studio opening here in Nashville. So
nice.
Ted Jensen just opened a studio with a bunch of other great mastering engineers from Sterling Sound. And it's literally in my neighborhood.
Wow. Wait, is it over in East Nashville?
It's in East Nashville. Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty cool.
Wow.
Pretty cool. And there were some heavy hitters in that room. Let me just say.
I bet.
So that was pretty cool. But all right, dig it. So let's ask another couple of questions here. Let's keep moving. Here's one. Are there any tricks to adding parallel compression to the vocal in a mix to give it more air and presence? I felt like as I was listening to some of your music that it did an excellent job of having, and I was probably thinking about that Aaron Thompson pulse too, but the vocals just sitting just right. And it's like, they're quiet, but there's all this like forward presence to the tone, and it never sort of buries itself or leaps out too much. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about parallel compression in that context, or, just trying to do that vocal mixing tricks where you're bringing air into the vocal and stuff.
Yeah, I think, I generally have kind of my vocal thing dialed in just about the same for everything I do. And I do, I do a mono output from the vocal comp track, and then I create two mono aux inputs and spill that vocal to both of those. And then on one of them, I will generally do like an 1176 with some pretty aggressive compression on it. And then on the second one, I will generally do like an LA2A type compression on that and make it more gentle. And then I'll spill those two sum together into a stereo aux track, and then pan those both center. And then from that is where I will generally do EQ. I get my compression blend spilling into that track correct, and then I'll EQ, DS, and go from there. I've been really finding sound toys have this Psy EQ. It's SIE is how it's spelled, and then EQ, and it's a cheap little plugin, man. But I'm telling you what, there's something about that thing on vocals that, and I'm sure it's great for many other things too, but for some reason I keep finding myself using it for vocals. It gives that presence thing that you're talking about, and then some of those harsher, like 2K in between 1.5 and 2 sometimes that's harsh. It's like you can attenuate that out with that EQ, and it just still has something, I can't explain it. So
I wonder if that's the SIEQ is in my Sound Toys bundle. I haven't been using it, but
yeah.
I might have it already. Need to check it out.
It's the simplest little EQ plugin, but I'm telling you, all the predetermined frequencies that they have on there, you can, just sweep through them one day, and I tell you what, either boost or cut by an extreme amount, and still hear how musical it sounds. It's crazy. So
all right, let me say that back to you. So you take your vocal comp track, and then you have two sends on it. So the vocal comp track is going to the stereo mix, but there's also two sends that are going to two aux tracks beneath that.
Well, and actually, I'm not even doing sends. I'm literally taking the direct output of that vocal comp into two aux tracks. So,
okay.
Yeah, so they are receiving those two aux tracks. So what I do is I've got it set for, I named it LV mix. Inside my bus, and it's a mono bus. So that output of that comp is LV mix, and then the two inputs of those aux tracks are LV mix. And then I've named my what those spill into is LV MST for LV master, and then those two go to that. So it's probably sounds ridiculous.
And no, it's all right. No, it's okay. So LV master is an audio track, so you re-record it back onto a printed audio track.
It's an aux also, and and then of course that goes to a vocal subgroup, and then the vocal subgroup goes to five different parallel buses, and then those all feed my created mix bus per se. So
man,
yeah,
we're getting deep.
I know it's probably confusing everyone, but
that's cool, man. Maybe we'll have to get you to share more of that at some point.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, and then so the vocal is getting compressed by an 1176, but it's also getting individually compressed by an LA2A, and then those kind of blend back together. And again, you're using the universal audio plugins for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. And then IK, sometimes I don't like being chained to my recording, my control room, and also I have a UAD satellite. But sometimes I don't even like having to chain myself to that. And I say chain because I like to move around sometimes when I mix, So I've found if I want something that can allow me the freedom of being able to like leave this room and go somewhere else, the IK multimedia stuff is pretty, I mean, it's like I think it must be a best kept secret or something because it's super affordable. And I found that their 1176, and I mean, pretty much all their emulations they're really nice sounding. I mean, that's all I'll say is they sound fairly close to what I hear when I hear the UAD stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, that's cool. I remember one of the first plugins I discovered and was sort of had a holy shit moment was the early T-Rex. I think it was, I don't remember which version it was, but it was an older one for sure. Yeah. And I started putting that on mixes and I was like, oh, my mixes are really sounding good now.
Yeah.
Just pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, dig it. Let's jump into a couple of closing questions and we'll kind of roll out here.
Sounds great.
So very quickly, when you started out in recording, what do you feel like was holding you back?
Just, I would say fear in my own ability. I don't know. I'm sure that's a relevant thing that many people go through. You know, when you truly care about something, I feel like you should never feel like you're good enough at it. But it can be paralyzing for people. And so if that is the case for some of the listeners, I would say just trust yourself, you know, and
nice.
And don't be scared. So
nice. Or do it anyway, even if you're scared of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even, you know, something's funny note is this. Really, for me to even do a podcast, I don't really like to talk about myself. So it's just put yourself in situations that make you uncomfortable, you know?
Nice. Well, I made you talk about yourself for an hour and 45 minutes. So that's awesome. Well done. All right. How about some of the best advice you remember receiving?
I think just, I learned this when I went to Nashville. I forget who it was that told me, but I'm wanting to say it was in Sony with, I forget. It was one of the writers there, but they said, you know, I've found that the people that are generally the best at their craft are the most humble. And that's another thing too. Now that's the flip side of, yes, you know, don't let fear stop you from doing things, but also just try to be a good person. You know, that's for me is it, you know, advice. As long as you pull that into any situation you're dealing with, and it's even surpasses the audio world, you know, that's just life in general. I think people latch onto that and people feel your passion for what you do, you know? Yeah.
Dig it, man. All right. So now you've already shared a bunch, but do you have another recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that the rock stars could use today on their next session that you want to share with us?
I'll tell you, like, I think I like to a good, I think it's just with modern music again, we think we have to close mic everything all the time. I think just, uniqueness in sounds oftentimes don't come from putting a microphone right up to something. So be unique, you know, and, experiment with just stuff that would seem otherwise wacky, you know, put a microphone in the weirdest place you could ever put it, you know,
and then listen.
Yeah. And then listen. That's it. Yeah.
Cool, man. All right. Now, how about sharing either a favorite hardware tool or something you're just excited about now?
Hardware tool. I'm really liking my, I've got a little, it's one of those retro double wides, man. I tell you what.
Oh yeah.
Something about a mono overhead, and then this is after I've recorded it. I will record it and then I'll print it back out through that. And I'm telling you, it's not normally a compressor you would crush drums with, but it just does something cool, you know?
Yeah. Is it a stay level or the double wide is the name of it?
I think it's the double wide is the name of it. It's a 500 series unit. But it's not like a true stay level type compression. They say it's kind of like in between, you know, it's kind of its own hybrid thing. In theory, they, you know, it would sound more like a stay level than an 1176, you know, right. Well,
that's cool. Well, Retro makes some amazing stuff. So good tip. Now, how about sharing a favorite software tool or something that you're just excited about now?
You know, I'm a big advocate for companies offering their products for free. But Isotope's doing that. Have you messed with the Ozone Imager?
No, not yet. No. Well, no, I mean, I do have Ozone, so I probably got it in there, right?
Well, they have their own little standalone imager plugin that you don't even have to open up the whole big Ozone for. And it's I'll tell you what, man, on subgroups and stuff like that, it does some cool stuff. And
so it's like an MS Widener.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, but it sounds real musical when you use it. Another good one too that I feel like is some folks don't know about would be Waves. There's a company called Waves Factory, and they have a plugin called Track Spacer, and that thing is it's a nice utility plugin. It's a sidechain type plugin that has 32 bands of EQ that attenuates from your subgroup that you're trying to affect with it. And so, I mean, that in just a little bit of proportion can make some really, really nice room for things in your mix, So
interesting.
Great plugin, great little plugin. So,
Track Spacer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool, man. All right. So now how about any resources or tips for the business side of doing a studio for those of us who want to do it for a living, not just for a hobby? Yeah,
I think, web creation has gotten so easy nowadays as far as website designers. I think look into, obviously the two that I know you guys have talked about in the past is Wix and what's the other one called? I forget.
Squarespace or something like that?
Yeah, I use Wix, but I've had pretty good results with that. And then as far as, like billing, there's some really, really amazing online billing services out there now that are really affordable. FreshBooks is one of them, and I just recently switched from FreshBooks to a company called Zoho, and I really, really have liked what they've done for billing. So as far as customizability and stuff like that, I feel like Zoho has been great. So
cool. What is something that people don't know that they don't know about online billing? Like what's a feature where you're like when you started using it, you were like, oh my God, that's so easy, or that works so well?
I think, just being, this sounds horrible, being able to see when someone actually opens an invoice.
Right.
It's always nice to be able to see that kind of information, because there were some times when, in the industry side of things in Nashville where, oh, we didn't get that invoice. Oh, well, you did, I could see that you got the invoice. So that kind of stuff, but it's, and as far as, to me, it just helps me. It helps me collect faster, when I've done something.
Yeah, so I agree, man. I think for me, what it does is before you had something like that, if you were sort of writing up a PDF and sending it to somebody and you were following up later, you're like, oh, wait a minute, so-and-so didn't pay you. What was the deal with that? Then you have to make the effort to send another message and compose some text or thoughts around it to try and sound polite and everything else. And then it becomes a hassle for you. Whereas when you have the online invoicing, you literally see it in there and you just go hit the send again button and you don't even think twice about it.
Right. Well, yeah. And once you hit that send button, a lot of them will automate the process of if they're past their time on it, it will resend, it will, it will update. I mean, it really automates a lot of it to where it gives you more time to just focus on being creative. You know what I mean?
Right,
so that to me is, it's game changing.
And 99% of the time, whoever's on the receiving end of that invoice is just like you or me, and they're just busy and they just don't want to, they want to deal with their email when they can. And if it fell off the email radar, then they forgot about it for a moment. And it's that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And then, it's, being nice people, sometimes you would feel bad for saying, oh, I should resend it again. Is it passive aggressive? It's like, this just does it for you. So.
Yeah, indeed. All right. So now organizational online resource. You talked about being hardcore about file management and stuff like that. Any more tips for organizing and keeping your shit together in the studio?
I think just learn everything you can about how whatever DAW you're using, how your file how your file system works for it. What happens when you bounce? Where does it go? You have to know these things. You can't just be printing files and having them spit out on your documents folder somewhere randomly. I think I think just spend a little bit of time. Every DAW is fairly, from what I can recall, is fairly similar with how file management goes. But some of them do vary a little bit. But just know how your folder hierarchies work and all that stuff. It's doing what we do, and I'm not sure how you do it, Lidge, but I mean, I always tell people, listen, like I'm not a library. Like we're working together. I'm giving you a product. But at the end of the day, like if I were to lose all my backups 12 years from now, you should have yours. I'm not responsible for that to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
But that said, I can easily go back and find any project I've ever worked on because I've had to be meticulous about being able to go back and be able to get it, so.
Well, let's talk about that for a sec. So one of the things I try and do is I try and have double archive drives. And once it moves off the work drives that are on the computer to the storage archive drives, I'll just have 2 copies there. But the process over time and over years of actually knowing which archive drives that project is on, whether this was the latest version or whether I backed up another version on the next year's drive. Stuff like that is a little hard to track. Do you have any tips for that?
I think just just have a clear indication of what you've done and when you've done it, and label it. Generally I'll keep all my hard drives in the same spot, so I can go have it labeled on the outside. As long as you can date a project back to when it was done. I mean, as long as you are properly naming your Pro Tools revisions and stuff like that, you should be able to access. And again, that ties back to my progress folder. I know there will be a scratch mix in that folder. I know that there will be a mix print 1 in that folder. I know there'll be a mix print 2. If it's gone to 4 revisions, every single one of those 4 revisions will be there. Mm-hmm. When it's even mastered, I even drag a master into that folder too. So I know that any variation of my prints will always be in that progress folder for that session,
Right. So. That's cool. There was another tip somebody shared on the show once where they said they would, when the Finder window was open to show the contents of a drive, they would just hit print on the Mac and it would print out a piece of paper with the list of all the folders.
I heard that one day. That was brilliant.
Yeah,
yes.
And then you could just like tape that to the drive when it's on the shelf, so you can have one less step of having to hook it up to go look for something.
Yeah.
Cool, man. All right. Well, so let's jump to the final question. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You're going to go find young Michael and tap yourself on the shoulder. You turn around and you're like, "Yo, dude, what are you doing here?" You say, "I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day." What advice would you give yourself if you could go back and do so?
I would say trust yourself. Again, throw yourself into uncomfortable situations, musically speaking. Just trust in your abilities, Given that you've spent your whole life to develop them, trust in them. So for sure,
I would encourage you to go one further and really identify what your abilities are too.
There you go. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to know what those are initially, and you don't.
Yeah.
But so that's great advice, man. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show with us, dude. Let the rock stars know how they can find you online and learn more about you and your music.
Perfect. Yeah, you could just you could find us online at just www.courtstreetrecording.com. Send us a message or whatnot, and Facebook business page too for Court Street Recording. So it's probably the easiest way to find us.
COURT, as in going to court.
Yep.
Cool.
You got it.
Does that doesn't mean you're going to judge my mix, does it?
That was awesome.
Dig it. Rockstars, a reminder, links to this stuff is going to be in the show notes. We put a YouTube playlist together of Michael's music. You can go check that out, as well as a link to his studio. And while you're there on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the notification bell so that you know when our new videos are coming out, and drop a comment in below. And Michael asked us the question before, which was, let us know if you, what you think about needing to move to a music hub, or whether you feel like you can make records and work with artists from, this town that you live in, or a city and somewhere that's not New York, Nashville, and Los Angeles, because I think that's a great question. And I encourage all of us to make great records all over the place.
Yes.
Dude, thanks for being here, man. We'll see you in the studio. Hopefully I'll see you around up in Ohio sometime soon.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having us. And I'll be back down to Nashville probably sometime in the spring just to visit. So maybe I'll hook up with you.
Oh, yeah. Give me a shout for sure, man. Thanks, dude. Cheers.
Thanks, Lidge.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with these weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com. Look for the link in the show notes. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio, all totally free. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.